Hi, I'm Sarit with Minted Space, and thank you so much for joining us for our new podcast, Sustainability Buzz Conscious Conversations. Our first episode is The Truth About Textiles, how fast fashion has become an antiquated practice in today's mindful world. I am so excited because we have with us a very special guest, the incredibly talented, successful, humble, dear friend of mine, sustainable fashion designer, Tricia Fix. Since 2003, Tricia Fix has designed bohemian style clothing and accessories. After meeting her husband in 2006, they traveled to Thailand to meet his family. There, she discovered the Hmong Hill Tribe textiles. It was love at first sight. Starting with dresses, then moving to handbags, all of her pieces are made from repurposed materials, from the vintage Hmong textiles down to the repurposed denim lining. Each year, she travels to Thailand to work with artisans to create each of the one-of-a-kind pieces. All of her textiles are made by artisans in Thailand and then assembled in Los Angeles. Using repurposed materials is the soul of the brand. No scrap goes unused. Deconstructed and reconstructed into one-of-a-kind works of art, reworked by hand in Los Angeles. Tricia, thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited to talk to you and hear all about you and what you're doing right now. And one of the things, I know that you launched your new line with Free People times Tricia Fix, which is a sustainable new fashion line. And I want to hear all about it. But first, I wanted to ask how you got into fashion, your love for fashion, and when you started designing.
So my mom had straight right shoe stores in Tampa and Brandon, and I started making her hair bows, and then eventually moved on to doing like her little dance leotards and stuff that she would sell in the store. And I did that through high school and paid for my car payment and stuff like that. That's how I initially got started. And then when I went to college, I was studying fashion and merchandising at Florida State. And with my learning disabilities and dyslexia, it was tough in college for me. And so, I decided to move back to Tampa, and my mom got a kiosk for me near her shoe store, and I started doing those big oversized shirts and turning them into. So I did it for like buck shirts. I did University of Florida shirts, and I would sell them everywhere. And I started doing stuff for the Buccaneers cheerleaders. This was like when I was like in my 20s. And then I started doing I think I did stuff for a lot of the teams in Florida. And then I started selling them at stores, like any fan store for like the Bucks and stuff. And so I was doing those, and I just, Tampa was kind of, there was really nowhere for me to grow in the city. So I moved to Miami, and I started doing that there in Miami and selling them to stores. I mean, I would take my briefcase, I'd take like a rolling bag and take it to all the stores in Miami and sell the Heat stuff, and did the Heat cheerleader stuff, and then just sold those. And that was out of these oversized things because no one had caught up with it wasn't something that anybody had caught up with. It wasn't a big money maker. And I was doing it at such a young age. I think I was 21, 22, 23. So that's kind of how I initially got started. And then from that, there was really nowhere to grow because you need licensing and stuff like that. And that was really expensive. So I started doing dresses, and caught the eye of an investor. And he invested in a business for me. And I took my big suitcase to New York City and took it to all the different showrooms down. I would take it up and down the fashion district, going up and down into these showrooms without appointments, just walk in. I was like, do you want to see my line?
That's amazing. I love that.
And so a sales rep picked me up. We decided to do my first show, which was Coterie in New York City. This was 2000, I think 4 or 2000, around 2004. And my first show, I was picked up by Nordstrom's, Intermix, private label Victoria's Secret, Burdines, Macy's. I mean, all your major stores.
Wow.
It was a huge show for me, and it was my first debut, and I was, I think, like 24 years old.
Incredible.
But before that, I was doing stuff. You know what I was doing stuff when I was in New York City. I was up there a lot because my brother was there. I started doing stuff with Patricia Field too, and so I'm jumped ahead of that. But so if anybody doesn't know who Patricia Field is, she's the stylist for Sex and the City.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
That's
So
right.
I would take like my oversized shirts and do these like I would take like wedding dresses and I would deconstruct them and I would do these like crazy skirts with them and dye them. And I would spray paint like all this crazy like liberal stuff like marriage sucks or whatever. So just all this stuff that a 24-year-old would do. And then I would do like, I would take like workman shirts, I would take like military stuff and I'd make corsets out of them. I would do all this stuff for Patricia Field, had one store, but she would also use my stuff and she would, you know, when she was styling other TV shows and Sex and the City. So she would use my stuff for those shows too. That was right before, I was doing that a lot right before I got picked up by this sales rep and then did my first show. So I think like just deconstructing stuff has like just been, I didn't have any fabric. I didn't have any money. So like all I had was to go to like a thrift store and take something that already existed and recreate it into something that somebody would buy. I mean, that's all I could do out of necessity, right? So
it was like natural, sustainable design.
It's just natural. Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of how I got started. And then I've evolved since then.
Yeah, you sure have.
Years.
So then, I mean, obviously you use the deconstructing and using, you know, other materials rather than new materials. So that's sustainable practice, but you really amped up your sustainable, your use of sustainable materials and designs. How did that happen and when, if you could tell us about that?
So we all remember in 2007 and 2008, that's when the financial system basically crashed. And so from that, natural things happen. People can't pay for their orders. People can't bring in their orders that they've ordered. You know, I mean, things were amazing and people had huge orders, right? So I would go to ship and people couldn't take them in. They didn't have the money for them. And so it was a real financial strain on my company. So what I ended up having to do was I would take fabrics from previous seasons and create designs from them, because the way that the fashion industry works and the way that it is when you're ordering textiles is there are minimums, especially when you're ordering overseas. For like a knit, there's a 3,000 yard minimum. And usually you only use 400 yards of that or 1,000 yards of that, right? So you have all that leftover yardage that you either sell to a jobber, which I'll explain later what a jobber is, or you just, it sits there, it's waste. It's just dead stock. That's what we call it. So I was taking that and designing with that out of necessity, and just was able to sustain myself barely. And then that's kind of like how I got started. And then I learned more about the benefits of sustainable fashion. And also during this time, that's when places like, you know, H&M, Zara, Forever 21, Topshop, all those things were like booming, right? That one-time use clothing, right?
Yeah.
That's when I was doing more sustainable stuff. And I think it never really picked up any momentum because there were no social pressures to buy clothing back in 2007 and 2008. Our generation didn't understand that, right? Like people my age, they didn't want to, it wasn't cool like to go and buy something sustainable. There was no social pressure. There was no big push for that. And so thankfully it took our millennials and a different generation to really, you know, be conscious of what they decided to buy and put on their bodies. So that's kind of how the sustainable, how I got started in sustainability was back in 2008. I don't know if that answered your question.
It does. It definitely answers my question. And I know that you started traveling just a few years before that to Thailand, and now that's like the, you know, the bulk of your designs are using those textiles. Can you tell us more about that and fair trade and how important it
Yeah.
is for you to support indigenous
Yeah.
cultures?
Yeah. I mean, that's a whole nother part. So I met my husband, he, back in 2000, I think it was 6. And then, he took me to Thailand we went for a wedding. I was there to meet his family, and we kind of like, we went to Chiang Mai, and I kind of was just going around to all the different, artisan markets. And I was like, it was like candy in a candy store for me. I mean, I love color. So I was just
Yeah.
dying. I was like, everything in my head was like, like, how am I going to incorporate this into my collection,
Yeah.
And it took a really long time to find a way to incorporate it. And I think for me, I had to find out who's my audience, right? Who's going to buy this? Like, who's going to really love it? What brand is going to love it? And so it took some time, but I loved it. And I think, these artisans are so talented. There's a lot of different tribes in Thailand, but one of them is the Hmong, Hmong, the Hmong tribe, the Hill tribe. And they design a lot of this stuff, and then they bring it down into the city, into the markets, right? Because they live in the hills of Chiang Rai, Chiang Mai. And for me to incorporate it, because of who I'm married to and my kids, and I wanted to keep that. And I just appreciated how talented they were, right? And and I really wanted to incorporate, and I educate people all the time about where these textiles come from, because I didn't design those textiles, right? I'm just buying them from them. And I think that is a big disconnect with the United States and other countries buying from indigenous people. They don't get credit where credit's deserved.
Yeah.
A lot of times people will go in and they'll buy, a piece of the Hmong textiles, and they'll take it to their factory in China or wherever, and they'll be like, knock this off. I want
Right.
this in the masses. Because here's why. Because they are selling to the masses. They want to make money, right? And all of these textiles are one of a kind. You can't go online and say, oh, it's harder to go online and say, oh, you're going to get this bag, but it's not going to be exactly like this bag. It's going to be similar. But there's like this, they couldn't do it. So they just knock it off. The problem is that they do it and they don't give back to the community that they're stealing from, right? They're stealing, essentially. And I think that just like gets under my skin. So I don't make as much money as I probably could if I just went and did that, right? But it's important to me that I go there, that I buy from them. And not that I just buy from them, that when I do bring it back here, that I make sure that it's a part of the story of the company, that people understand where it comes from.
I love how you incorporate the fair trade practices
So
into your designs. It's because it's not just the environmental, it's also that social sustainability factor, which is important wherever you are in the world.
Right.
That's
Totally.
You're amazing.
Thank
That's
you.
awesome.
I'm very passionate about it because,
Yeah.
I think for me, when I first started in 2007, I was in New York City, and I remember telling you this, I walked into Forever 21 and my dresses were everywhere.
Yeah.
I didn't see a penny of that, but that was my idea being stolen from me. They had them, and like down to the print, to the little like bead on it. I mean, everything. I didn't get a penny for that. They stole it from me, and they steal it from the indigenous tribes. And I say they, I think everybody knows who I'm talking about. We're talking about fast fashion, right?
Right.
So
Exactly.
I feel like there needs to be more laws and more things to hold them accountable for what they do.
Right.
There's not
Yeah.
enough social pressure on them.
No, there's not. And what's great is that, unlike, like you said, back in 2007, where our generation wasn't necessarily so privy into, to the ethical consumer mentality, whereas now the bigger brands who do the fast fashion, they do have now more sustainable practices, not necessarily because that was something that they came to on their own, like the way that you're passionate about it, but because that's what the consumers are demanding. But at the end of the day, we just want the change to be, because the fashion industry is the second biggest polluter in the world, second only to oil. You say for new designers and established designers, how can they incorporate sustainability? What's like an easy way for them to incorporate it into their designs and their practice?
I'm going to answer that question, but before I answer that, I just want to say one thing. When you when companies go to have their garments cut, right? So they have basically like a blueprint of the pattern of, let's say, a t-shirt. So they cut out, so they lay all the fabric and then they go and they cut it out. Well, you've got all this 75% of this of the actual fabric ends up on the floor.
Wow, that's crazy.
Right? Because it's just cut out and thrown on the floor. It's scraps, right? And it just gets dumped. And so I think that for me as a company, that's why I say no scrap goes unused. I use it throughout. I mean, I don't throw away unless it's tiny piece. I can't use it. I keep it and organize it in my studio. So I just wanted to say that really quick because a lot of people don't know that. But going back to designers, young designers that want to get into the industry and they want to do it sustainably, do your research, right? Find out who your audience is before when you decide to start designing a collection. Who is your audience? And my biggest thing would say, and something I wish I would have done, was go intern for a sustainable designer. I mean, there's so much to be learned. I mean, even if you're not getting paid, just the educate, it's free education, right? If anybody came and worked worked with me, they would be hearing me yapping my mouth all the time. They could be taking their notes. I never shut up. So, I mean, they would learn so much from somebody like me or somebody,
Totally.
that is another sustainable designer. So I would say the biggest thing, if you're going to go to school to become a designer, great, wonderful, but go work for a sustainable designer. Also, I would say that in order to be designer, you need to understand how the garment is made or how the bag is made. You need to understand how to make it. So you need to know how to sew. You need to know how to do a basic sample production. Because unless you understand how a garment is made, you don't understand the waste that's involved. You don't understand what materials are needed. And so I think that that's one thing that I would say that I did that helped me a lot. And just be conscious, use dead stock, I mean, just find ways to use materials that are sustainable. I mean, in fact, it is less expensive to buy your textiles from a jobber than to buy from, just a mill. It is. It's less expensive. I mean, it's like $3 a yard versus like $8 a yard, and you don't have minimums.
Wow.
So
So can you tell us more about jobbers? Because you had mentioned that. So for people who
Yeah.
don't know what.
So I had mentioned before that, like, when you're ordering fabric, sometimes if you only have orders to use up like 1,000 and say the minimums are 3,000, you have all that leftover fabric, which is called dead stock. So what a lot of designers did was they would sell it to jobbers for, let's say, 25 cents on the dollar or 15 cents on the dollar to them. And then they have these huge warehouses, especially a lot in LA. They even have a few in Miami, but they have a lot in LA. And so that's what they do. And then they sell it to other people. And so a lot of us designers picked up on it and we're like, hey, like Reformation, she goes to the same jobbers that I go to. And she does limited runs. And so all of that is used, and that basically that answers what a jobber is.
And you just came back from Los Angeles and you went to the Rose Bowl flea market. I know that your travels and the places that you've lived have definitely influenced your designs. Can you tell us how, just a little bit more about the Rose Bowl flea market and your passion for it?
Yeah. So I would not be a sustainable designer if I did not live in LA. There's a lot of social pressure to be environmentally conscious there. And one of the things that I fell in love with that a lot of people don't know about are the flea markets in Los Angeles. I mean, they are, I mean, you will find the coolest, I mean, like the edgiest stuff, like the stuff that's right on the cusp of like, a lot of people don't know this actually is, it's funny because all of my buyers go there to get ideas, but you'll find designers that incorporate, you know, that kind of like your Etsy designers will be there. You'll have your vintage clothing buyers. You're going to have a lot of people that sell military, antique furniture, vintage furniture, like everything that you can imagine is at the Rose Bowl, and it's so quirky and so fun. And so when I was living in LA, I was going to it and I was like, well, I have all these samples that I had from previous seasons that I wanted to sell. And so I started selling them at the Rose Bowl, and I started, and they were all like my Hmong like samples and stuff. And I was like, I was across from a guy selling like military jackets and like some vintage stuff. And I was like, this is when it really clicked, the Hmong, and how I was going to really incorporate it was when I met a lot of these vendors, and I was like, how cool would it be to put the Hmong on the back of a military jacket? I mean, that is like a perfect canvas for it.
Totally.
And I started doing those, and of course they were a huge hit. We sold them in Bloomingdale's, we sold them, Free People bought them. God, they were everywhere. And so that kind of like got me thinking, and I started working more and more and more with a lot of these vendors. So I'm working now, all the liners in my bags are from leftover cut off jean shorts, cut off jeans. And so I work with Urban Outfitters distributor for vintage, and I take all his leftover denim and I use that for the liners in my bag. So I just like use that as like a resource for me to incorporate it. And so now I don't just work with Rose Bowl because I've grown a lot. And so I work with all sorts of people all over the world. I even there's a market in Thailand, which I haven't been able to go to, called the JJ, and it's every Sunday, and it's like the Rose Bowl on steroids. And so there's the same stuff there. And so I work with a lot of their dead stock too. So, and when I say dead stock, I mean like vintage clothing, you know, military, whatever, all their stuff too. So yeah, but I love it.
You're such a genius. I just love hearing you talk about your practice and how, you know, how you incorporate all of these just sustainable practices. And what people might not know is that you're not just great at fashion, you do upcycled furniture, you remodeled an airstream. I remember a couple of years ago, you did the long process. You bought an airstream and you, remodeled it and turned it into an Airbnb in Los Angeles. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah. So my lovely brother, he came down. I was like, you know, Ryan, I would love to get an airstream, you know, and like, I always wanted I had this like little plot of land in the back of my house. I was like, I'd love to do Airbnb, and I'd love to, you know, do it with an airstream. And I thought they were super cool. And so we bought it, and he ended up not wanting to do it because he was traveling too much. And so I took on the project, and this thing was like, oh my God, there was like rat nests, all sorts of things.
Oh my God.
It was a total gut job. So we bare boned it, and then we built the frame back up using bed frames, you know, like the metal ones.
Yeah.
We soldered those down, and we remade the frame out of the metal bed frames.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sure is.
And then from there, you know, we used a lot of like all of the wood that we used for the base boards were from just we didn't go to Home Depot and just buy fresh wood. We just used wood that people weren't using. We were really, you know, thrifty, because I had a budget for it that I needed to stay in, and so I tried to incorporate all the sustainable elements that I could into the airstream, and everything that we did was sustainable except for the kitchen and the bathroom. It was hard to find small enough pieces to fit
Yeah.
into it, because they could only be like 8 inches deep. They couldn't be, not 8 inches, I'm sorry. They could only be, where's my yardstick? I think it was like, yeah, they could only be like 18 inches deep. And so I could only work with certain places to do like the cabinetry and stuff, but everything
How long
else
did
was
it take?
sustainable.
That's so awesome. How long did it take you to remodel it?
A year, because it took me about, I sat on it for a while because I didn't know how I was going to do this. And so it took me about 6 months just to research on how to do it, because it's not like a regular remodel like you would with a house that's a square, right? You're essentially working on a plane.
Yeah.
So you're working with rounded edges. So it took like a lot of research and so many YouTube videos, lots of articles, forums, and I just went in and read all the forums on how to do it, finding the right person, finding the right contractor to help me with it. Altogether, it took about a year, but to do it, the remodel from start to finish, when we started, it took about 4 months.
Wow. And for people that don't know, obviously Tricia has this very successful, fashion and accessory line. She's also a mother of 2 children, and she was, remodeling an Airstream, and she like runs like 8 miles a day. So you're a good use of a example of efficient timing. And then you also you do upcycle furniture for a hobby. I love your chairs. Can you just share how, like, where you find your furniture that you upcycle?
So Marcel Brewer does like a really cool chair called the Seska chair. It's a mid-century chair. Some people may have had them in their kitchen, but it's basically like a rattan chair with a square on the bottom and on the back. Well, I would always see these on the side of the road in LA. And they would have the broken out rattan, right? And the broken out. And so they were like unusable. And I was like, I know I can do something with this. And so I sanded it all down and took out all the rattan and I macrameed it, because I love macrame. And so I ended up macrame upstairs. And then I took a Wesley chair. I don't know if I'm pronouncing it Wesley or Wesley, but it's basically like a chrome chair. It's like a lounge chair. And so I would macrame those. And then when I was at the Rose Bowl and like selling my samples and stuff like that, I would bring my furniture, sold some pieces to Drew Barrymore,
Cool.
Gwyneth Paltrow. We have a lot of celebs that hit those markets. All my buyers go to the market too for inspiration. But yeah, it was fun. It was something for me to do in front of the TV to kind of like de-stress. So yeah, but I use everything that's already existing.
That's awesome. So
Yeah.
now, back to your like main gig, which is, fashion. I'm so excited about your new line with Free People. I know you've designed for them for a while now, but now this is the collaborative line, Free People times Tricia Fix. And it just launched this month, and you're going to be launching over the next few months. And it's, by the way, already selling out. So people should definitely check it out at triciafix.com. But can you tell us about the line and what we can expect to see more from it?
So one of the reasons I love Free People is because they're a big proponent in sustainability. They actually also have their own sustainable collection using sustainable fibers and fabrics. So they've always tried to integrate it into their collection. So they're a wonderful company to work with. So what we are doing is we're designing a collection using vintage. So it's repurposing clothing. So for example, like this vest I have, so it's like I don't know if you can see it. It's like a vest, but I took, so like, this is something that they're going to have this summer. So we took like a military bag and I just like deconstructed it and reconstructed it into this. And so everything that we're doing is what is the word I'm looking for, is repurposed clothing.
I've never seen a bag like that. I've never seen a vest bag like that. It's so cool.
So I got the idea from my father-in-law. He is like an avid hunter, like guy, like he's from North Carolina. You would know it because he's Thai, and he's like from North Carolina, and he like loves to hunt, and he would wear these all the time. And I was always being like, preach, I love the fact that you're wearing. And so I just designed it out of the bag. So what I was trying to do is, when you're buying dead stock, the hardest thing to do with Free People, with us, is because a lot of our sales is done on the website. So we have to do something that has consistency, right? So like, I can't just take a bag that has a pocket in a different area or something like that. It can't look that different. So the best way to do that is to take something and redesign it and have them all look the same and carry the same kind of concept throughout. Like, for example, like this it may have different, like, it may have like a different color. It may be green or olive, but we keep the same. I use old bandanas, and then we use the same color bandana. So it'll look, and then all of our belts are vintage belts, but they'll all be like brown vintage belts, or we'll do like some hardware on them that all have the same hardware design. So we keep the same kind of design theme throughout each piece. And so that way it's, it translates better to the customer, right? So, right. So that's this whole line that we're doing. I launched two pieces that have, so when I say no scrap goes unused, for example, we did a denim shirt. And so I took the scraps from my scraps and I dyed them, and I hand cut out, you know, smiley faces, mushrooms, suns, different kinds of things out of them with eyes sewn on. And so I did all these whole little designs out of my leftover scraps, and sewed them onto the back of some of the shirts, put them on the front like little mushrooms. Yeah, so that was that. And then we're doing a lot of like French workwear. We're doing a lot of like you know, denim overalls, and there's like a whole laundry list of things that we're doing. Now I'm incorporating, we're taking these Euro linen laundry bags from the, I think they're from the 60s and 70s. And I'm repurposing them into like, you know, cool, like sling bags, backpacks, all sorts of things we're doing with those. So
they're so classy. I saw what you had posted. They're beautiful. I can't wait to see them.
They're fun, right? They're fun.
Yeah, definitely fun. What's your favorite thing to design?
These kinds of things, deconstructing and reconstructing. So like, I love taking something that you would never think you could turn that into that. And I love doing that. It's because it's just like, I guess it's just goal driven, you know, it's like, you don't think you can do it, but then you take it apart and you're like, what you can do and make it look like afterwards looks nothing like the way it started. And I just find like so much gratification out of that. I'd like people to see what I'm doing and thinking, oh, I can do this too, or I'd like to learn more about it. You know, I'd like it to trend more, you know. I need more designers like ourselves. I mean, collectively, if we all did this, what a world would be, you know, how fashion could change so much. It was funny because I was reading about Maria Hoffman. I don't know if you're familiar with her as a designer, but she's pretty big. And she started using her previous textiles from previous collections just recently. And she's a runway designer. And so it was really cool to see that. So I feel like there's definitely a movement. And so I'd like to be more of an influence on other young designers. Yeah.
That's great.
I've learned from all my siblings and my mom, and, you know, my brother, a lot of people don't know this about him, but he is a huge force of sustainability. And I learned everything I know about sustainability, I learned from my brother. And, you know, he was the big push back in 2000 and 2008 for me to start doing this. And, you know, we just weren't ready for it. Our generation wasn't ready for it, but now we are. And so you got to take those horns and you got to really run with it. Right. But, I learned a lot from him and from my mom. And I think when you feel yourself wandering away, you just have to think about something that sticks with you and just go back to that. Go back to basics,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
Don't get
It's
too
funny
ahead.
because I was in Los Angeles when you were back, in the early to mid 2000s and studying sustainability and environmental policy and green buildings. And that was big out in California. But over here on the East Coast now, we're both back in Florida. That wasn't really something that was big. And now I just moved to Tampa, within the last couple of years. And suddenly there's, Water Street Tampa, and they're doing the well certified buildings and LEED. And it's definitely becoming more mainstream, which is great that these words that we used forever ago are now, they're commonplace. And that's a great thing. And like you said, like creating the materials and the textiles and the thoughtfulness and ensuring fair trade practices. I mean, it's key, especially for an industry that's as huge as yours. It's definitely key.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm glad there are still I'm glad there are people like myself and you that have carried something important to them throughout their lives. But these millennials they're the ones that need to continue this, right?
Yes.
And so I feel like they're our audience, and they're the ones that we need to be preaching to and teaching on
Yes.
how to do it, how to be more conscious, and how you can do it efficiently, right? And costly. So yeah.
Tricia, I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me and to tell us all about your company and about your passions and your brand. And again, check Tricia out at triciafix.com. And thank you so much. I can't wait to talk to you again soon.
Thank you. Mwah. Bye-bye.
Bye.